Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Esports Salon. I'm bringing that show back because we need it in this industry. I know Monty tried to do that show for Jack that lasted about fucking 2 whole episodes before he just abandoned it, which basically was the same premise that Monty stole. And because he's Monty, he then literally went on Twitter and was telling people like, I've invented a new show. We really need something like this. And even though he's been on this show himself many times, but that's just more a rant about who Monty is and what a ridiculous human being is, if you know him at all personally. So the point of this episode is, it's no big topic or anything, guys. It's just like, how do we save the entire NA region from being a laughing stock internationally at Worlds? So no biggie, nothing anyone's been, scratching their head about over the years, right? The obvious joke here would be the fourth person should have been Reginald, but he didn't have any answers, so he just decided no point to turn up to this particular episode. And he told me when he figures it out, he'll let me know first. So no, there's one area I want to actually start here, right? So here's one thing that people never do, right? And anyone who's ever written a college, as you guys call it, a college paper, an essay, will know it is good practice whenever you are writing an essay to, in the first paragraph, deconstruct what the premise of it is, and if the premise and the given assumptions even are real. Like, was this the great American novel? What does it mean to be the great American novel? So similarly, I actually want to start out by asking both of you. You can go first, Steve. Do you actually think there is a problem with NA? Like, I will say, a lot of it does tend to centre around every time TSM gets eliminated because, listen, they have won championships. They're a fan favourite team. But, like, your team last year was in the MSR final. Jack's team obviously was top 4 at Worlds a couple of years back. Do you actually perceive there to be a problem in this regard? Does LCS have a problem? Does it affect the international scene? Where do you come down on this, mate?
Yeah, I think NA has a problem, for sure. Based on the level of investment that's been made by the league, the teams, the players, we should have more consistent performance on the international stage than what we've been able to demonstrate in years past. We've had a few highlights like the ones that you mentioned. It's just not enough. So yes, there's an issue.
Okay.
Or issues.
Yeah. What about you, Jack? Where do you come down, mate?
There's absolutely an issue in my estimation. And you really see it like right now is a great time to ask, because you see when you're talking to players from Europe and your players from Asia, they're nervous to actually come out here. And sometimes there isn't enough money for you to give them for them to come out, because they want to win internationally. And they feel by going to NA, like they're selling out. They're just collecting a paycheck. They actually can't compete internationally because the region is so behind. And there's a lot of different places that there needs to be the work to be done. And one of the scariest issues for me that I don't think we can actually impact is the actual player base of the number of people playing ranked here in North America.
Yes. Okay, well, actually, let's just start there then. So one aspect also of this discussion is, yes, we'll definitely have a discussion about talent base, how you develop talent, all the rest of it, because that's a key angle that I notice a lot of fans key in on. But one area I feel like is a little bit disingenuous, even when fans say that, is the same fans who want you to develop all the talent. They're not the hugest fans in the world of the teams that just go with all the NA players and, let's face it, as a result, not the very good players. Like, the teams that they're the fans of are the ones with the big imports in. So for me, as long as it's possible to import, and as long as places like Europe speak English and have really good players, it's going to be natural to put some imports in your team if you're building an NA squad, especially as, like, if we're going to start developing talent, we're not going to have 5 LCS players ready to be champions and go to Worlds immediately. So you're going to have some imports. So let's start at the top end of the equation, where both of you have done a very good job the last few years, particularly, obviously, Steve's been willing to spend big for some of the names. Like, I mean, I always think that angle that they all degrade doesn't quite work for like people like Core JJ. Looks pretty amazing to me, mate. It looks like he's still in really good form. So what I want to ask is, either of you can start on this one. That topic right there has been a big issue. I've also heard it myself a lot more this year than past years. In the past, what would happen is, I don't think many players really themselves would admit that they were selling out if they went to NA. But what they would do is this, and I can tell you from knowing a lot of them as friends, they would look at their options in Europe. Either they've already won a bunch of championships in Europe, and this is before the days, so I'm thinking of people who went to TSM like Mithy and Sven. That's before they actually even thought you could win Worlds or something from Europe. So they thought, right, well, if I'm going to come like top 8 or top 4 anyway, I may as well go and get paid 4 times more by TSM and be in the same position, right? So that was fine. Or they're guys where this could be something people might say about Alfari here. They've never been on a team that won the championship. So their logic in the past would have been, right, unless I can get into, it would now be G2 or Fnatic, the absolute best European teams, then is it really different to be on the third or fourth best European team but get paid more if I play for Team Liquid or Cloud9, TSM? So that's how they used to like weigh it up then. But I have noticed this off-season in particular, you've even seen it in interviews, some European players have just admitted the disparity in the amount you can get if you go to NA wasn't enough to overwhelm them if they thought there was any chance in Europe now, especially with all the rookies and stuff. So where do you guys come on that one? Like in the past, if you were trying to lure someone over, was it just a case of showing them a big salary or showing them some good players? How has it changed in that regard?
Yeah, for me, I mean, we've imported players, I don't know, for the last 8 years or so. And so I would say the main reason why a player wants to come to Team Liquid, it's winning. They want to join a team that is going to perform well and have a chance at winning a championship, which I would say we've been able to improve on given winning, some championships. And they wouldn't come over or join the team unless they thought they could. And roster comes first. So it's, okay, what player is coming in? I'll come if that player comes. And if that player brings this player, then yes, I'll join the team, but only if you can get these components. That's the bulk of the conversation. Sure. That's a requirement. Compensation is a portion of that. I think North America does a better job on the team side in generating revenue for teams than probably our counterparts in Europe. There's some reasons for that. It's harder to monetize a team in Europe because of there being so many different countries, so many different languages.
Sure.
There's not as many sponsors that have budgets across different countries within Europe, where there's more international clients in NA that have global budgets, even though we have an NA team.
Sure.
And so, yeah, we have, I don't think any of the successful teams in North America are going to apologize for running a successful business and having more capital to then pass down to players, right? I think we should be paying players a portion of what we get. Teams shouldn't be holding and retaining profits, just because the market average globally. Like if NA teams are earning more, we're going to pay more to players. And so I think it's a side effect of the business, but also, yes, I think that's part of the reason, but I don't think it's the driving force. I think it's, at least the conversations that I've had, has always been about winning and building a good team.
Like if you look at, for me, like the tipping point for this question and where the problems really became real was after 2018 when Fnatic got to finals.
That was the game changer, you think?
That was the game changer because now Europe saw like, hey, they could be winning, worlds. And like, I know it wasn't just me. I can't speak for what Steve did, but I was basically open. Here's my checkbook. Write in whatever number you want into it, Caps, and come on over. And he told me, there is no number. I think I can win worlds with this team. So it doesn't matter. It's not the money. I want a chance to actually win. And for me, that was the first time I'd ever heard that, like, so direct. And I was like, uh-oh. This is scary because I think this is a trend that's going to continue. And then with our bad performance in 2019, our not great performance in this year in 2020, I think it only has solidified that concern. And so I think it's something we're going to need to address. We either need to show better performance at Worlds in 2021 to start taking us back to a place where we're showing to be more competitive. Or there needs to be some changes like in the import rules, like maybe they loosen them up. Maybe we can, I love what they did with us, have us having access to Australian players. Maybe that could be, spread out to other areas. But there are several things that could be done to make this better. And I hope that we can, flesh out some of those right now.
Even though, listen, like when you describe it that way, like I can understand why Caps might think that. Do you actually think those players are right, though? I mean, I can certainly understand it. Like, I actually think that's an area where I feel fans have also skewed the discussion a bit. If you're G2, like G2 is an outlier. Even Fnatic, the difference between Fnatic and the top NA teams wasn't as crazy as people made out. Like, there's a like if you looked at them, they weren't very good in the summer. They might have even made it to Worlds. Like they kind of turned it around. They had a nice meta. Like it wasn't like for me the G2 team is like that's a lightning in a bottle. I don't know how Carlos got those players, got them to like he got the 2 best mid laners on one team. There's a bunch of special factors to that one. Are the players right in the sense? Like I mean, if I bring a player over who's an AD carry, Steve, and I can tell him he can play with Core JJ, that's as good as any European support player. You know, there's no reason why he has to feel as though like why staying in Europe so important if they think they want to win? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always there's only a handful of teams that are able to put together what is perceived to be very competitive rosters going into the spring split, right? It's not like of the 10 teams, 7 of them look really great and have a chance at winning a championship.
Right.
It's usually there's 2 or 3,
yes.
or maybe there's 1. And like, because of that, if you're in Europe and you're trying to go and win a world championship or have a really good shot at doing that, and those opportunities within the region that you're in are not available, then yes, I can also have a chance looking to North America to also have a chance at winning, because I don't want to play for a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th place team in Europe, right? And I think we've demonstrated that we've had places where we've performed better. It just hasn't been consistent, right? Like our MSI run that we made, which was amazing, right?
Sure.
Like beating the incumbents, and Jack has had some great performance. It's about consistency, and also it's our best team doesn't compare to the best team in Europe more consistently, right? Like the fact that TSM was the number 1 seed and then went 0-6.
Sure.
That is a stigma that now NA has to deal with because of the team's performance, right? People won't maybe remember how TL did because it's just so bad how TSM performed. And that is the lingering memory, which is unfortunate because that is then the narrative, not how we did, right? Even though it was close to, hand grenades and horseshoes, doesn't matter, but
sure.
We didn't do well enough. And so that when you have enough of those add up over time, then you just get the EU's greater than NA narrative. And but I actually don't agree that it's always about bigger paychecks in NA as being the reason. At least based on one-on-one conversations with players, I feel like they are going for a team that they think they can win on.
Yes. I actually think, by the way, just in general in esports, that is one thing that's misunderstood. Like you say, certainly salary's a big deal. Like I'm sure salary's the second question once they decide if they have the right players. But I've noticed players are very cagey. Like as much as like when people say sellout moves like that, put it this way, I'll give everyone a spoiler if you're a European fan. All those really big name European players who went to NA but joined the bad teams and got paid a lot, they didn't get offers from the top teams. Like that was when they were on the years where they were down in their career. So they might play it off like I went for the money. It's like, well, they did. They didn't have the option, like it's not like they decided to go. I'll just give it one that isn't an example, like Golden Guardian. They didn't go to Golden Guardians over Cloud9. Like if they went to Golden Guardians, that means actually they were probably choosing between 6th place in Europe and 6th place in NA. So people definitely skew that a bit. Like in general, players want to play with good players, right? So isn't that part of also the equation here to get the right imports? Along those lines, by the way, one thing I have to ask you is, one thing Europe obviously doesn't do, because it doesn't need to now with the rookies, is they don't do Korean imports anymore. That's not really a thing. There's like you get the rare one that's over there, and they're not in the top teams at the moment. Is there anything that's changed in that regard? In your team, maybe not. You got the MVP, but is it time to move away from Korean imports for LCS? Should they be Europeans, for example, in those slots?
Hold on 1 second. I'll be right back. I need to close the door.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for TL's perspective, and then maybe I'll comment on what I think just generally in NA. From TL's perspective, we put a lot of infrastructure in place to help with having Korean players. Like we have translator, we had a head coach. We had an assistant coach that was bilingual. Like, so we felt like we had adopted that, and we put that in place when Piglet came over,
right,
and
yes.
we just stuck with it. And so then we built upon that, and then we had tutors, and we put a program in place with UCLA so our players could go over there and do classes. Like, we just started to build a structure. Then all of a sudden we were like, oh wow, we have like a really great ability to have Korean players come over and feel very comfortable within Team LiQuID because we have the right support staff. That being said, I think the biggest change I saw for the regions was that a lot of Korean players, instead of thinking about coming to NA first, thought about going to China.
Right.
And when that happened, it was, I think, closer proximity wise. There was like more relationships with agents there. There were also billionaires that were ready
Certainly,
to pay
yes.
big salaries for some of the top talent. And then at the same time, with franchising happening in Korea, there was a requirement for academy programs and to field those teams and to build facilities. And when that happened, then the talent that would have otherwise came to NA ended up just staying in Korea.
Right.
And if they didn't go, and so I think the side effect was that I think you saw less players finding NA desirable, maybe not because of what was happening in NA, but what was more or less happening in China. That's my personal POV, though.
Okay. Where do you come down, Jack?
I think it's really accurate. I think as we've seen the LPL get stronger and stronger, it's become more and more attractive to the top Korean players. So NA wasn't their first pick, and Cloud9, much like what they did at Team LiQuID, we have a lot of Korean staff. We know how to really be respectful of the culture of the people that are coming over and make sure they can integrate well with ours. And I think so it's definitely like, I would be happy to have more Korean players, absolutely. But I think we've just seen a lot more competition from other regions. So we're just not the first pick anymore.
Okay. If we go on the other side of the equation, which is the one that everyone talks about, which is the angle of you've got to bring up and develop talent, which I will say is clearly quite fueled by Europe, where you had Mad Lions and Rogue, and it was basically mainly rookies or last year's rookies. You know, people see these players come through. And so even though, as you pointed out earlier in the episode, there's a totally different player base and a different sentiment and a different streaming attraction, etc. There's factors as to why NA maybe doesn't have as many of those talents. The perception I get from fans is the ones who understand those conditions still sort of want to think, I mean, Licorice, an outgoing player, would be an example from your team, Tactical maybe. They think, right, there are some players there though, so like they think it's essential, we've got to nail these players down. So Jack, maybe we can start with you on this, because if people don't know, last year's off season, basically the entire domino board, as it were, was based around who signs Vulcan and then who signs the junglers. Like, it basically, the NA players dictated the rest of the market, right, as to which imports you fancy. It was different from the old days. So what do you think of this angle that you got to secure the right NA talents?
In our current system, it's essential that you have your 3 NA residents that are really high quality. And because of their rarity, they're often a large driver in what happens in off seasons. This season might be a little bit different, but if you can find like 3 really competent NA players, like filling in with international talent is easy because there's a much larger pool. But last year when we were looking to get a support, like Vulcan was the option. It wasn't like a variety of guys to check out. I was like, okay, we have this one guy. I'm going to cut a check. I don't care how big it is and make it happen. And that's unfortunately fairly common. Like each off season is where are these high quality NA players going, because they're crucial to my roster's success.
Yeah, it's just true. You know, what ends up happening is that you have academy running, and there's maybe a handful of superstars that are in academy, right? And then you have, I think, a lack of in the proper infrastructure for those academy players by most of the LCS teams. And then not like 8 out of the 10, right, I would say, are not putting in place academy coaches, academy development, positional coaches for academy, like proper scouts, like the ability of developing academy talent, right? We need to allocate budget to making sure we win an LCS, and then academy doesn't get the structure that it needs. I would even go as far to say some of the collegiate teams probably have better infrastructure on training their college players than some of the LCS teams do for their academy players, which if you do that, you're never going to see the academy players develop fast enough to then have a chance on replacing their counterpart in LCS. And so there is just less NA talent that organizations are going to take a risk on playing in LCS when we need to win now, and we need to demonstrate that we are going to perform well. And that's kind of what I think is, you have to try to identify what is uniquely different in North America in comparison to other regions that is causing NA to not develop its NA base.
Okay.
Right. And a lot of people just point to server, right?
Yes.
Like, we don't have as many players. That is true, but that just makes it much more difficult, not impossible. So I think teams need to do a way better job of allocating their total budget for League of Legends to actually developing talent, because there are new players that are coming up. It's just that we need to give them the right training to develop. And I think a lot of teams check the box on that. I think Jack and Cloud, you guys do a fantastic job of this. I'm a little envious of it. We try, but we've struggled to put in the right staff and infrastructure and duplicate what we're doing on the LCS side, because you don't just put the academy guys in the same room as the LCS team and have one teacher. That's just not usually how it works, right? You have a separate set of staff, and then sometimes they get together for certain group activities and things like that. But it is pretty segregated. You saw like Echo Fox try to do the whole, I think it was Echo Fox, like the whole, we're only going to have our LCS team scrim our academy team.
Yes.
We knew how that went. So, when that didn't work, you didn't see other teams kind of adopt a strategy where they're kind of working more in tandem to improve the performance of the academy players.
Yeah.
You got some secrets you can let go, Jack? How do you do it, mate?
No, I mean, I think Steve has done an incredible job too with this academy team. And which, if you look back at our team's history, Team Liquid and Cloud9 have been involved in the development scene since day one. We always had teams that were in the challengers, scene, trying to win spots there, and so I think it's part of our culture. We both really believe in supporting up and coming talent, and it's not even a question. Before Riot ever mandated it, we were doing it. So, I think we are way ahead of the game because we have that history, and it's a core part of what we do. I know I really don't have insight into like how these other teams are run, so I don't know how Team Liquid runs their academy. But with Cloud9, it's really important that we have a lot of face time between our academy players and our LCS players. We work out together in the morning, we eat meals together, we do fun activities together. So there's like a relationship that builds up between them, so that the LCS players can really be seen as a mentor to our academy player. The reason why Fudge got so good was because he got to literally talk with one of the best top laners in the business every single day. They did one-on-ones all the time, and it accelerated Fudge's abilities dramatically. And so I think that part of the success of Cloud9's academy programming is that culture of these teams working really closely together. And I think that when our LCS players are these mentors and are teaching these academy players, I think it's mutually beneficial. I think they actually learn a lot when they're working with these guys. Yes, it does mean in some cases they lose their jobs to these guys. It's happened a couple times,
Yes.
and that's a little scary. That's scary, and it's understandable, but I think it's crucial for the success of our program.
That sounds like something actually that there's maybe something there to dig into actually. Because listen, I get it if the player considers himself to still be within his prime. Like he thinks he can win, he can do stuff. So like you're saying, he doesn't want to raise the next guy who's going to replace him. But I think of some of the teams where they do essentially recycle like quality players, but they're players that aren't going to be the best. Like I feel as though if you had the right relationship with the veteran player, you could almost make it like that's part of why I'm signing you, like maybe you're not the best absolutely your role, but I'm bringing you into, you're going to play for me this year or for these splits and you'll compete for the spot, but you have to sort of help me bring up the next guy. Like I think of in some of the sports where you have like a really legendary player who's at the end of their career and you try and get them to do that with a point guard, a quarterback, whatever it is, give them a little bit of the magic as it were. What do you think?
Absolutely. It's conversations that we've had. We've went as far to try to create incentives for it, to say, look, if you help with this, we'll give you a kicker of certain things. Yeah, but a lot of it depends on the personality of the player, like if they're just like, hell no, like I'm doing my own thing. I'm only going to talk to like people of my caliber. I'm not here to train anybody. Like I'm focusing on me. And then it's like, I'm not going to force you to go to do that, right, and add to your responsibilities. So a lot of it is just like personality and what fits. But yeah, I think that concept really works. But I to Jack's point, having the players together is really important. And there's and of all of the teams, like there's less than half actually have either a facility or a place where all of them are together. Right. Some of them just like keep them remote and they play remote or they're in a different house or, so they just completely they're just not close to the team. So they're not getting that kind of development from just being around their respective LCS player in the same position and the things that get talked about during lunch. So.
There are risks to doing it. There's some teams that like literally won't let their academy team watch like the scrims of their LCS team because they're worried about leaks, and that's a real issue. It's a real. Yes. You have to trust your academy players to act responsibly. We've chosen to just trust and hope that they never screw up because most likely we'll find out if you do. It's pretty big implications. But it's still, you have to trust. And like when we're doing our drafting meetings for upcoming game, Fudge is sitting like right next to LiQuiD112 while LiQuiD112 is talking about his priorities and what matters. Like and that experience is invaluable to these guys to actually understand how these guys are thinking about the game and how they want to play the game. And then when they go do their scrim, like a couple hours later, they've got all these ideas that they probably weren't thinking about. So, but there is a level of trust you have to have, and it is a bit scary for some of the LCS players to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would go as far to say that tactical, one of the reasons why he had the success he did was because of his proximity to Peter, his proximity to the coaching staff, like everything that the extra nights he stayed just to spend time with the review and pop into both. Like he was like, my eyes are set on this. And it's like, you're all at the Alienware training facility. So I'm just going to hang out here all the time and absorb as much as possible. So, yeah, when you get a rookie player in NA that is kind of hungry enough to absorb the environment that the organization creates around them, they're going to have a higher likelihood of becoming a tactical in the 2020 season.
Yeah, along those lines, actually, that's another thing I wanted to discuss a little bit. So there's like two angles I can see to this, which is if you look at the players that came through and that were NA products and they just hadn't been there, but they went straight to the top, basically. So Tactical's a good example. If people don't know, he was literally on the TSM Academy squad. So TSM clearly didn't have the foresight to see maybe he could be our AD. They let him go. Obviously, LiQuiD112. People will always tell you, Jack, a million stories like, I always knew he was amazing on E United. It's like, well, where were all the people trying to sign him? They weren't there.
I scouted him.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
So many people.
Exactly. There's like a million stories, but like if you notice, the story never ends with, and then I signed him to my team. It's always like, great job picking that guy up. So what they're saying basically is, as long as they don't have to take the risk, everyone's a genius. So this is the two parts I wanted to take. One, listen, just the performance, it is a big risk because since you don't have, like you said, a massive backlog of rookies, like in Europe at the moment, they actually have the opposite problem. If you fail your first year as a rookie, they're just going to toss you to one side and go, listen, we've got a million rookies coming through. We'll find the guy who makes it. So actually, it's brutal in a different way there. So first of all, he has to perform. And obviously, it's really tough to know based on the academy play or like low-level LCS if that guy can be on a top team. And then the other angle to me is the angle of like fan pressure, which is again, right? After Season 8 Worlds, everyone knew Jack was a genius for picking LiQuiD112. Tell you what, when it was like Impact going out the door, super stable player who's always a good top player, people weren't as confident then, mate. There was some people were saying, we're replacing Impact. You know, he's money in the bank. Why are we bringing this guy in? That guy was a world champion like that. Similarly, I'm sure when you put tackling in, some people were like, look, okay, it's one thing if Doublelift goes, but we're not getting a big AD carry to replace him. Like that's like not only pressure on the player, but the scrutiny. It feels like you don't even get the chance to fail almost. You have to just be amazing out the gate almost.
Yeah, I think in some cases, you know, and there's always counterpoints, you know, like Josh, you know, had many opportunities, right?
Certainly,
and,
yes.
And then you have Josh Gardock, you know, and I love Josh, he's great, you know. But then there are other times where, yeah, there you get one, and then there's, I think, you know, Acadian played once and then kind of went back to academy and then came back into LCS with TSM. So I think you can kind of point to different narratives for different academy players, but from my perspective, if you're an academy player, your desire should be to get into the right infrastructure, to learn as much as possible, to be surrounded by really great players and develop. And then, you know, your performance in academy may not be as important as like the counterpart on the LCS team that you get to watch all the scrims and talk to every day.
Right.
So part of that is like, I believe an academy player that goes into the right infrastructure is going to have a higher likelihood of becoming an LCS player at some point. I believe that the organizations and the teams have a pretty big influence on that.
Huge part of my, like, when I'm talking to prospective academy players, to tell them like the culture that we have at Cloud9, that they will have access to the LCS players, and if you're super good, like, many times in Cloud9's history have we promoted within and actually gotten straight to the LCS stage.
Yes.
And I think it's really important for academy players when they're thinking about what team they're going to join, that they know they have a real shot. And like you'll see them often, like they'll be like, okay, I could go to Cloud9, but the guy in front of me is super good, but I do know I actually have a chance of like taking his spot if I prove him better. Then you'll see other academy players like, oh, they hired that same old veteran for that spot. Oh, I'm taking his spot. He sucks. I'm going to replace him. Okay. So I'll just like prove that I'm better. So like it's interesting to see like their decision making, but that's still really risky because generally most teams are super risk averse to trying new talent, which I think is really confusing.
What do you think on that generally, both of you? Because, I mean, the obvious examples is, and this isn't even any diss to these players, it's just that they've done this over and over again. Listen, one of my favourites, Froggen, Hooney, these people, they keep getting signed over and over again, but they're not setting the world alight. Like, when you sign them, you're almost saying, yeah, maybe things go well and we have a chance to win, but otherwise we're just going to be all right. You're not really saying, like, I'm going for gold, like I'm going for the top spot no matter what. There's a reason why you think, because one angle, here's the angle I don't get it from. A long time ago on this exact show, actually, a few years back, when you guys were trying to make the case, actually, as to why you needed franchising, everyone sold me that great line that, like, oh, well, then we won't have to recycle talent because what we'll do is since we can't get relegated, we'll just try out the new talent. It's like, listen, that all sounded great, but no one did it. Everyone, like I said, those players are still getting signed. So, except for a few people who've done some bold moves or get the best imports, the rest of the league generally does recycle, but this is what I don't get is what do they actually get from it? Because like it's not like they make money at the moment. So that's the part that's weird to me. If there was like that old angle that people thought that like Twitter followers equals dollars equals, you know, like some weird cynical like robber baron move, that doesn't really even work though. So what is the purpose of recycling the talent, do you think? Why not go? Why doesn't everyone go for first place basically?
I think like you happen to be talking to the two dudes that take the most risks on new talent. So,
Okay.
like, I think, you know, as long as they keep doing that, that's probably to our benefit. So
sure.
you say, I don't know. I have no idea what it is.
Okay.
It seems like a really good idea. They should go for the most Twitter followers. That means more wins, right?
Okay.
But like that, it doesn't like. And for me, like I, you know, I've said this before. I don't give a damn who, like, how many Twitter followers you have and how big your YouTube presence is. I'm not hiring a streamer. I only want my team to win. And if you don't even have a Twitter account, that's fine with me. I want to see how well you play. And I'm pretty sure it's the same way as Steve. We're looking to build championships here, not Twitter following.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think you know, if the question is why do we see so many players go from team to team to team to team,
yes,
and those teams that sign those players not do well, I think now we're talking about management of the team, their coaching staff, their analytics, their scouting procedures, how they view a good player versus a subpar player, or what player has the best years ahead of them instead of behind them. You know, that has to do with team management, I think, and some of the decisions that they make, because I won't talk about anything specifically, but there's definitely been cases where I've seen signings and I'm like scratching my head, like I that makes no sense. Like, how did they come to that conclusion, right? And there are especially when franchising did happen, you know, there was you can't some of those organizations needed time to learn how to build infrastructure and determine their process. But now that's no longer an excuse, right? Yes. These organizations should have something in place in order to make good decisions on this. And but to the other point about not being able to take risk on new players, I think part of it might be this kind of, we need to win now, right? Like, I remember Team LiQuID thinking that when we had the promotion relegation happen and the whole midlet situation,
right,
and you know, we had our backs against the wall, you know, I thought to myself, we need to win next season no matter what. I don't give a fuck. Like, we need to put together the very best roster. No timing, no development. I'm not going to waste around. I just want the absolute best roster we can put together, like starting in January. And so when you need to win now, whether it's for the team, the organization, the brand, partners, sponsors, it can kind of not give you that leeway to bring in a rookie player and then have them develop on the LCS team and go through some losses. So that can be part of it too, as like why it happens.
One aspect I wanted to talk about is obviously the server issue. Like, basically, here's how I think of it. You can definitely still get really good players. You always will. That's down to scouting, analytics, how you develop them, what environment you put them in. We've discussed a lot of that. But obviously, if the top of the funnel is way more narrow than Europe, there's just not going to be as many come through. And the odds of getting one is lower, right? But one aspect I wanted to bring up, because people always talk about the quality of solo queue, and that's like a historic thing that people complain about. Probably also because, to be fair, fans can engage with that, and then they can complain about solo queue and whether it's good or bad. Well, one aspect I wanted to do, I always try to think laterally. Like, when someone says basically there's a problem and there's no solution, so let's just forget about it. It's like you've got to try and think is the ways around it. So one angle I had was the old school way you would have done it if it had been a world where you didn't have to keep playing LCSs. Maybe you would send the team for constant Korean boot camps. So what I thought was, is there a way you could do the opposite? Like this is a ridiculous, I'm going to float this. It might be a totally stupid idea. Maybe you'll shoot it down completely. But is there a world where, in the same senses, they tried to laterally get around the practice angle by having the in-houses? That's what all the players thought they wanted. They wanted to have other pros play. Essentially what they're saying is, I just want my play when I'm not with my team to be higher quality. I want it to be better players. Could there be a world where, since the one thing NA always has is the money, could there be a world where there's like houses set up in NA? Listen, obviously not right now. This is not the perfect time to present this solution, but I'm just throwing it out there. And you fly over the top 10 solo queue players from LPL, from Korea, but the ones that aren't in teams. You just fly them over and you tell them, listen, you come over for 2 or 3 weeks, you play here, it improves the quality of solo queue, or maybe we scrim our players against them, whatever it is. Then you go back and then I bring in, 2 months later, I bring in another lot. You could use this either as a practice mechanism just to improve the quality. Is it too ridiculous an idea? Like, would you ever even consider spending money on something like that? Is it a wild one?
It's a little wild. I mean, one, it's impossible because visas and immigration, and you have to qualify to be part of the league in order for all that to go through, and so it's not possible. I mean, maybe on tourist visas for 30 days at a time. But the concept of NA solo queue not being good as other regions, I think, has some real merit based on what I've heard from players. We have a much smaller server in comparison to the LPL, right? It's just not just by a little bit, by a lot. And so
they have 10 servers that are bigger than ours.
Yeah, exactly. It's like close. I don't know the math because I don't think Riot's ever shared it. But if you knew the math, you'd be like, oh wow, the fact that they went 3-3 at Worlds, given the fact that they have a server size of the size, is actually pretty friggin' impressive.
It basically makes TL beat an IG that time like one of those like Miracle on Ice moments, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah,
there's a lot of issues.
Like, make this happen.
We have a ping issue.
Yeah,
we have just a queue issue. Like when you queue up in Korea, for a challenger game, you get the game immediately. Out here in the United States, it could be like 20 to 30 minutes before you even get a game. So yes, it's going to be the slow ping. Then it's going to be waiting. So you're going to fraction of the games because of it. And then once you get into the game, it's interesting. Like in Korea, if the game is going badly, if one side is really playing poorly, the game is pretty much given up really quick. So in Korea, you can get like 5 games in an hour, and you'll be lucky to get 1.5 here in North America. So just the number of games, you're getting a lot less. The quality, because the ping is higher, and the quality of the players is worse. So it's not just one thing; it's just a snowball effect of bad. And so, it's the speed of light issue, ping issue is like something we just can't solve unless they move the server out to the West Coast, or we actually have like an FPL type situation where the players actually participate. We're not going to be able to fix that one. And then the number of people playing, that's another like real issue. I'm not quite sure how we're going to fix. I do think that we could adjust the quality of play, though. I think that if we see more pros really pushing for other people to have a better, higher quality of play in these games, that we could impact that.
I mean, obviously on that angle, that's actually one area, if people don't know, that actually people often compliment Sven, that supposedly when he plays solo queue, not only plays it seriously, but even has this thing where he just tells like his teammates, like, pick your best champions and let's just win the game or something. Like, he tries to sort of encourage the randoms that aren't pros to play properly, right? Along those lines, though, like, obviously, it's all well and good to tell your pro players, play seriously, pretend it was a real game, all that stuff, right? Which is, it's hard to do with young people. Like, is there a way, you maybe alluded to it there, one of the issues I see is the in-house argument, it's an okay one, it's not a terrible concept. Like, I can see what they think the value is. The problem is, for me, the closest thing you could get to a solution is, like you said, it's something like what we have in CSGO. It's having like an FPL where the idea would be you'd have all the pros and all the academy players. And listen, if you just have them already, you've got a pretty good solid pool, like 100 people there. You could have, but the issue there is, and this is an area you don't have in Counter-Strike, is the developer of League of Legends doesn't want all the pros leaving solo queue and going and playing off in some little hermetically sealed, development area. Like, unfortunately, the thing about League is they very much want to hook it into the casual experience. Like, they want you to believe there's this path to pro and that you can go and play versus Sven and Licorice and who else. So how do you resolve that? Is that an issue at this point in time? Could you make like this FPL and Riot wouldn't have a problem? What do you think on that one? It's a bit of a tricky one, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's already made. FaZe has already made like a platform that
can you get everyone to play on it then?
That's like, I'm not sure if like approvals from Riot are out there, and I'm not sure, like, I don't know if the players will actually use it, but it's like the technology is there. There is an answer there, and I do hope that we can see it getting used, because I do think that if we had a really healthy FPL style environment for our pros, it would help a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the tech is there. It's possible. And that solves the ping issue and the queue time issue and all that. So, yeah, and I think that happened, was it last year or maybe the year before? I can't remember what allowed it. Yeah, so that is possible.
And maybe like with, there's going to be a lot more investment in the amateur scene. Like part of the problem is, again, like more players playing at a pro level. So if the amateur scene like is developed more and we see more players that will be qualified for like an FPL type environment, then maybe we'll see a player base at the highest pro level that's actually acceptable. But there's a lot of ifs there.
Yeah.
And part of it too is that we can concede some of these issues. We will never have a server size that is in any way comparable to some of these other competitive regions. Okay, wave the white flag. We need to win somewhere else. Attack on a different front. You know what I mean? Let's figure out an alternative path. And I think we've made some pretty good progress. I can't speak for some of the teams in LPL or LCK, but they may be looking to NA and being like, well, they've really figured out that the software that they built to record VODs and comms and, that they use to replay, or maybe it's the sports psychology that they put in place and all the mental coaches. Like, we're kind of envious of that because we think that that's working. And so I think we just need to look to other ways of having players get better at the game without just repeat playing solo queue. And that requires us to approach the problem in a different orientation to get at equal or superior result. And I think there are teams, I know we are trying some of those methodologies. I've seen other teams, word gets around about what's working. So sometimes the process and methodology can be more efficient than repetitive gameplay, right? And it's not like the physiology is any different that makes one region, player potentially more skilled than another region. It just has to do with like the infrastructure that's in place. And so that's where I think where we can, as a region, have a good shot at it becoming a competitive advantage.
That's also go on.
I would like to see us approach all these different avenues of ways to improve it, because it's definitely not one problem. I think what Steve says is really right, and I also think going back to something you said earlier was that there was a fear that if you import players, they're not going to be popular. But our league's most popular player that just retired, Pederson, he's an import. So it's wrong. That's actually a wrong way to think. And I would love to see the import restrictions eased or just removed, because I do not believe we're going to see suddenly this lack in fandom in North American esports at all. I actually think the opposite would be true, that we would start seeing more and more top players coming to North America, and that as a region, more victories internationally happened because of that, there would actually be more fans of esports. And so it's not just like one answer. Let's not just solve the solo queue issue. Let's just solve the quality of the play, but let's open up like who we can actually bring in here, because I think the reasons for keeping such tight imports in our league doesn't really make sense.
What about listen, that's actually, obviously, again, that's lateral thinking because you're thinking outside of what the current rules are. But again, people's perception is that Riot won't want that, because if people don't know, famously, there was that LMQ team that was all Chinese right before they started to do the import restrictions. And then also, there was even stories back then that loads of the Koreans that had just fallen off. It was actually the people who came through Challenger later, like Mad Life and all those guys. They were supposedly all going to come to America and make a Korean team and thought they were going to win LCS. Right? Obviously, back then, Riot didn't want it. I could see an argument, though, for what you're saying, which is, listen, if we're not going to compete at the moment comparable to the absolute best regions, we're not going to win worlds, for example. Well, if we're still going to have people play the game casually, it's still a region of entertainment. Like, why can't our teams essentially just have the best players? Why can't it be like European soccer, where you can just buy whoever you want and put them on your Premier League team? And it doesn't matter that, listen, if I'm from Manchester, I support the team from Manchester. It doesn't matter the players from Africa or fucking could be Korea, could be anywhere. So would you think Riot could go for that, though? Because obviously they've shown apprehension in the past, but maybe for NA alone, they could open the gates.
Well, I think
Not to be a global rule, right? But go ahead, sir.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, one could be the obvious, which is increasing the number of allowable imports for NA teams, and obviously giving enough advance time in order for that to not interfere with current contracts, and teams have time to plan for that, right? It's not like, oh, we're starting that in January.
Sure.
It's in November now. Like, I can't do that, obviously. So that's one way. But then the other way is what they have already demonstrated with the OPL, right? Where you open up certain regions that have players that would not count as imports, and that opens up the pool, right?
Yes.
Like, and so now NA has a bigger player base or server base of potential players that can play, and that opens it up and provides more flexibility, more of a chance of developing what would be considered non-import or NA talent for the purposes of the league.
One aspect I wanted to actually ask you about, like one of the final topics here, is the coaching angle, because there's another area where at the moment, while like for a coach, it seems like it's very different. A lot of coaches potentially, if they get the big money offer, will go for it. Like, I mean, they don't know how long their careers are. It's still not that established a position yet where, I mean, it's hard to show how good you are as a coach if the team does badly, for example. You're not like a player. Your life isn't in your own hands in the same way. Now, NA has imported a lot of coaches, in fact, a lot of Korean coaches even. But that's one area where it's obviously a lot trickier to get the coaching staff right, because one of the issues I think people ran into is, I know some of the Korean coaches that came to NA and didn't necessarily win were good coaches. Like, they were good in Korea. That's the reason people signed them. It's just that, like, you know, for example, they had massive culture clashes, or they just imagined it was going to be different, or for example, like the best example is they come in and maybe their team has no Korean players, and so they don't even get to sort of flex the little edge they would have. Like, you've obviously both worked with Korean coaches. You've had success with them. Is there an angle on the coaching angle that hasn't been expanded enough? Like, do we need, for example, it to be like an NFL team where now you have like 5 different coaches, and there's a coach for top laners, there's a coach for the scrims only, and there's a coach who only does draft? Should we expand out? How do we attack the coaching angle to potentially make NA better?
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
I think one of the things to think about is like, I will take as many coaches as I can as long as they're good, but the actual number of good coaches is quite small. And generally, from what I'm hearing from players now is that, like, oh hey, this coach was just in the room, actually wasn't contributing at all. He was actually worthless. So I've tended to actually focus on coaches that are actually bringing a lot of value. And when you start churning the numbers, there aren't a lot of coaches that are actually good at providing value to these players. Generally, the players are the smartest people in the room as to how to play the game. And the game is still relatively young, and so there's just not a lot of really great coaches yet at this point. But that said, like, I have been spending a lot of time trying to find position coaches, because I do think it's really valuable if you can find the right people. And the best example for that was really what I saw with Fudge and Licorice. But it took someone of Licorice's caliber to really help Fudge accelerate his winning.
Yeah. You know, there's a lot of different competencies within coaching. You know, there's motivation and the psychology of it. There's the band pick element and preparation and execution on stage. There's the teaching that happens respective to a specific role, or the macro of team play at different phases of the game. There's mastery of champion versus just playing a champion well. Like, so we use the coaching kind of to mean a lot of different things. And what we've realized is it's impossible for one individual to embody all of these things that are necessary for it to happen. So to use I think you use NFL as an example, where you have positional coaches, offensive, defensive, you know, and different groups, the answer is yes. You know, an organization that's able to adopt the right coach for that discipline to teach that concept and do it well is going to help a player, the team, you know, a certain aspect of the game. But to Jack's point, it is hard to find those individuals, because, you know, you try to test for it, you know, interview, you know, we've had as an organization had a hard time finding stickiness with competency in these different areas. And so part of it is about, putting the coaching pieces together where they have a specialization, they know their role and responsibility, and how that creates the whole coaching staff, right? And each coaching staff is different based on the unique strengths and weaknesses of one of its members, just like a member of a team of players. So that's how we think about it. And like Jack, we're ready to hire way more coaches, but we go through a lot of interviews and cover letters and applications, and unfortunately there's not too many,
right.
It's like it's not a good pool. So then you go and you look at like retired players, or and then some of them don't have like maybe the professional management, or that whatever it might be, but it just means that there's a low talent pool on the coaching side in any of the respective facets.
It's super interesting when you take a player and you develop them to be a coach. I've done it a few times now, and you actually need to change their mindset, because like as a coach, they have to be an example for how they expect all of their players to behave. And it doesn't come naturally to a player to realize that, like, yeah, they need to be making sure that, like, that their attitude is correct, that they're coming with the right passion every single day. They don't realize that every single player on that team is going to look for them to be failing somewhere. And if they fail, then the players will think it's okay to fail there as well.
Yes.
And it's taken time for me when I bring on a new a new coach that's been a player, for to say, hey, your player days are over, dude. You have to step into the room and represent what you want your players to be every single day. Because if you fail, if you go out drinking like before a game, if you don't put in a maximum effort in this workout, if you're like fucking around too much, you instantly lose all the respect of all those players. And once you lose that respect, they just won't listen to you, no matter how good the information that you have. And so it's been an interesting process, like developing, these new young coaches. And I've had some success and many failures, unfortunately.
All right, should we just leave it there? That was pretty good. Got a good hour in.
Oh, yeah. It was great. I got to watch Steve's like sunset like through this whole.
I know.
I know
the ambience.
To see your dog come in, get comfortable in bed, the lights go down.
Luckily, I don't need to edit it or anything. It would look a bit weird, wouldn't it, if suddenly it was dark and it went back to the sunset?
Yeah, it is dark. Actually, I didn't turn the light on, so
yeah.
This video was kindly supported by Pronogo, Mohammed, Alabdul, Razzaq, Dean Tanglis, James Pederson, VatriSam, ErikHillestad, Andreas Kroknes, Hades, Zoomba Gaming, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, and Alexander Rao. Special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for one of my upcoming episodes? Maybe you want to ask me all those questions in that video AMA I do each month. Do you want teasers? Find out who the next guests are for my shows. Well, maybe you even want to take part in one of those crazy donated discussions where we go all over the place. If any of these perks appeal to you, or you want to support the channel, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.